Welcome to your new self-mixing reverb. That's right, folks, the AI paradigm shift is here. This is Aurora from iZotope.
Shadows, I was lost so alone, till I felt the warmth of a reverberating tone. Aurora blooms in the night, echoing true. Every whisper turns to gold when it's you. Hearts collide in the waves of your sound. In the silence I was buried but now found. Every note that was broken now you mend. Aurora's magic makes me whole again. Oh Aurora, you lift me higher. Infinite echoes, you're my fire. Through the night, your light will guide. In Aurora's arms I will reside. Crystal clear is the path I now walk. With every step there's a song as we talk. Aurora sings and the world turns bright, dancing in the echoes of your light. Oh, Aurora, you lift me higher. Infinite echoes, you're my fire. Through the night, your light will guide. In Aurora's arms I will reside. Moments drift on the waves of your truth, lost in the depths of your echoing youth. In Aurora's glow, I am reborn, wrapped in your sound, forever worn. The path I now walk. With every step there's a song as we talk. Aurora sings and the world turns bright, dancing in the echoes of your light.
That is so cool, man. That is Aurora from iZotope. Your new self-mixing reverb, a smart reverb that can automatically duck the reverb out of the way whenever it's necessary. So that first section there should have given you a pretty good overview of what Aurora is. If that's all you want to know, hey, go ahead and leave right now. But if you want to dig deeper, dive deeper into Aurora, we're going to do that right now. All right, so this is Aurora from iZotope, a self-mixing reverb plugin that can automatically unmask and duck down the reverb just when it needs to, so you get a crystal clear, dry track, and everything is still audible and articulate. Let's go over some more specifics here, especially of how this knob works here. So this knob, this reverb knob, is a reverb gain knob. What it is not is a wet dry knob. Now I'm going to show you what a wet dry knob is on a normal reverb here in a second, but what this actually does is just adds reverb to the dry signal. So listen to this here, right?
I may be down, but I'm not out.
Right.
Looking
That's
to
just the dry signal. Now we're going to pull in reverb, and you'll notice that the dry signal isn't going down. We're just adding reverb.
I may be down, but I'm not out. Look into my eyes, there's no doubt.
Right. So the full signal, the full dry signal is always going to run through. You're just going to add reverb. And the way this works is essentially what Aurora is doing is it's just like what we used to, which I'll show you here in a minute, but what we generally do for a reverb is we would create some sends for our track or several tracks into a reverb bus, and then we would come, I actually have one set up here, I'll show you here a little more in a minute, but then we would dial in the amount of reverb with our fader, right? We'd have our reverb at 100% and then just dial in the amount of reverb to add to the dry signal. So that's what's happening here in Aurora, but automatically and just in the back end, and it's doing it for you. So you can just put Aurora right on any track. It's going to set all that complex stuff up for you in the back end, and then just add in however much reverb that you want. Okay, now if you want to use this in a standard mixing way where you're creating sins and reverb returns, then you can just click the solo reverb button, and that completely bypasses the dry signal. So let's hear that.
I may be down,
Ready?
but
So it bypassed the dry signal, and you're not hearing anything because there's no reverb being pulled in, right? So that's just reverb, and then you're using the gain of the reverb right here. So you can mix with this either directly on a track or on your sins and your buses, however you like to do it. Depending on what you're doing, if you're doing a bunch of drums or something, you may want to put those in the same space. Again, I'll show you this here in just a second, but I want to get to the unmasker here. So let's dial in some reverb.
I may be down, but I'm not out. Look into my eyes, there's no doubt.
Now we would say that is completely washed in reverb and basically makes that that dry track, I don't want to say inaudible, but it's hard to hear. It sounds all washy. It just doesn't sound clear and articulate. So that's where our unmasker comes in. And our unmasker is kind of like a ducker, but it's a smart ducker. Which is a perfectly fine word to say. You can't, hey man, you're a smart ducker.
Shut your mouth.
It's not just a smart ducker though. It's kind of like a frequency independent smart ducker. So a normal ducker, as you know, will duck out, say, a reverb or a delay or whatever it is. It ducks out that signal when audio is playing, but it does it the full spectrum, the full frequency, like everything, right? It just pulls everything down and then it comes back up whenever nothing is playing. Well, on your unmask here, it's a smart frequency independent ducker that only ducks out those frequencies that the human brain would interpret as masking the dry signal. Okay, so it does all this smartly and in the back end, so you never have to think about it. You never have to set up a send in your buses and then set up an EQ before your reverb and then an EQ after your reverb and then try to dial all of that stuff out, right? It does all of it for you. So let's check out our masker or our unmasker right here.
I may be down, but I'm not out. Look into my eyes, there's no doubt.
Very good.
I found my place against the grain. Count every loss, it's always...
So now it's still a lot, of course, because we have this decay up so far. If I turn that down a bit.
I may be down, but I'm not out. Look into my eyes, there's no doubt.
There we go.
I found...
So we can still have a lot of reverb, but have that ducked out automatically. So this is one of the real cool things about Aurora is I can get it as wet as I want and still hear everything. All right, so that is your reverb knob and your unmasker. You also have some controls here for the attack of the unmasker. So how quickly do you want that reduction to come in? How quickly do you want it to release? And then the sensitivity. So this is level dependent. So if you're sending a very low level into the reverb and you want that unmasking process, you may need to up your sensitivity there to get the reduction that you want. Okay. You can also change your sensitivity to determine the amount of processing applied, because this sets the threshold of the psychoacoustic model. So if you think of like a compressor threshold, right? So you can have more or less processing on whatever you're pulling out here in your unmasking process. So generally, around 50, and then just use this here to set everything. But if you want to really dial things in, you can use your sensitivity to have more or less processing. Let me just show you how this works.
Within the sun, spinning lights that wrap around.
I'm going to reduce it here,
Every note a promise found.
but leave this down
Aurora's magic knows no bounds.
or pull it up.
Infinite the space we share in the night without a care, lighting up the darkest day. Reverb takes us in. Aurora nights, they take me high. In the echoes I'm alive. A sound so clear it makes me cry. In this reverb I can fly.
All right, so you can get a slightly different sound if you really want to get in there and customize everything. But again, generally speaking, leave it on 50%, at least to start, and then dial in your unmask. And then if you want to customize a little more processing, a little less processing based on your input signal, you can do that right here with your sensitivity.
I may be down.
So as far as your attack goes here,
I may be down, but I'm not out.
if I want that reduction to happen much slower, I can pull this way up, and I'm just going to exaggerate it here.
I may be down, but I'm not out.
So much slower of an attack time it takes for the unmasking or the reduction or the ducking to happen. Same thing for the release. We can make it real fast or real slow, whatever you want.
I may be down, but I'm not out. Look into my eyes, there's no doubt.
So of course, the longer your release, the longer it's going to hold it, right? You can actually do some really cool things with this. You can start getting creative with it by pulling your release way down and then say our attack. So we get almost like a pumping.
I may be down, but I'm not out.
And this gets really cool when you start messing with your decay and say your pre-delay, which can get kind of cool here.
Look into my eyes, there's no doubt. I found my place against the grain. Count every loss.
Now that's not what this is made for, obviously, but I'm just saying you can get, even though it's like an AI plugin, you can still get very creative with it. Just hold down Alt and click, and it sets these things back to their defaults. Okay, so we also have several different algorithms, reverb algorithms built in here, and these are high quality algorithms from Exponential Audio. I'll put up a description there on the side so you can just read what each of these are. They're high quality algorithms. This is an algorithmic reverb. But there's no metallic sound or tinny sound or just low quality awful sound that you can often get with some algorithmic based reverb. So I'm going to exaggerate this here and I'll go through the different types just so you can kind of hear them and read along to what they are.
I may be down, but I'm not out.
Change my decay first before we do this, and my pre-delay. We'll get to that in a second there.
I may be down, but I'm not out. Look into my eyes, there's no doubt. I found my place against the grain. Count every loss, it's always gain, gain. Straight into the lights, I found myself defeated, crawling out of the ashes, victorious.
Okay, then we have a pre-delay and a decay. So let's show our pre-delay here, maybe on this track here, which has some snare on it. All right, that's just this snare there. So let's take our pre-delay all the way down. Let's pull our reverb up. Now that reverb is coming on immediately once it hits that transient, right? So you may want that, you may not want that. Reasons why you may not want your reverb to come on initially, immediately as it hits that transient, is because that reverb may mask the initial impact. It may not just have the impact that you want. So adding a bit of a pre-delay in there keeps that reverb off when the initial transient happens, and then it comes on based on whatever you set it here. So whatever milliseconds you set it here. So generally, somewhere around 10 is a good setting for pretty much everything, right? You get the initial hit and then the reverb, but you can get more creative with this and start pulling this way up here. So now we'll get stuff like this. You can almost create like distance with it, like the initial impact and then how long before that echo happens. Or pull it way up and you get some crazy results. So probably not something you'd actually do, but we're just explaining how pre-delays work, just for those who aren't aware.
I may be down, but I'm not
We'll really pre-delay that. I'm just gonna oversaturate it here.
out. Look into my eyes, there's no doubt. I found my place against the grain. Count.
So then you get almost like a delay effect. And then for your decay is how long do you want that reverb tail to continue? So let's check that out. Let's pull our pre-delay down to like 10. Okay. Great. So now we'll take our decay way up here. Now that tail continues on. Again, it just depends on what you're doing and what you want. One problem you might have with those really long tails is it can start taking over, everything. But then your unmasker really comes into play there. So you can still have these super saturated and super wet reverbs with your unmasker, which again ducks out those frequencies because it does a psychoacoustic analysis, based on machine learning and AI, whatever, and then dials those out dynamically and just the frequencies that need to be dialed out. So you can still have these really lush reverbs while still maintaining clarity. right? We get this great tail that comes up, right? And the same thing happens there. As you heard on that initial part, on that vocal, we were able to completely saturate that with an extremely long decay, and it was still completely audible.
I may be down, but
Let's put our pre-delayed back down.
I'm not out. Look into my eyes, there's no doubt. I found my place against the grain. Count every loss, it's always gain, gain. Straight into...
Right, so doing something like that with a normal reverb would take much more work. If you want that long of a tail and also have it not just take over absolutely everything. All right, let's move on to our width. This is pretty simple to understand. How long or how wide do you want that reverb tail to be? Do you want it to be more narrow or wider? Again, I'm going to exaggerate things here just so you can hear it. We'll just go with that. So we'll go narrow first.
I may be down, but I'm not out.
You can hear it comes more down the middle.
Look into my eyes, there's no doubt.
Or wide.
I found my place against
All
the
right,
grain.
now you have this really wide
Count
space.
every loss, it's always gain, gain. Straight into the...
Okay, very cool. Then we have our tone, dark or bright. Very easy to understand here. Let's go again here on this
I may
side.
be down, but I'm not out.
Let me put this on Hall.
Look into my eyes, there's
So,
no doubt.
darker tone,
I found my place
brighter tone.
against the grain. Count every loss, it's...
Then we have high pass and low pass filters built in right here, so we can constrain that reverb however we want. So let's say I just want that reverb really on that top end. I can.
I may be down, but I'm not out. Look into my eyes, there's no doubt.
Now it's centered more around the top
I found
end.
my place
Or pull out that extreme top end and have it focus closer around the middle.
against the grain. Count every loss, it's always gain, gain. Straight into the lights, I found myself defeated.
Okay. All right, so next is our display, and you have a representation of the unmasking, or the amount that it's, where it's ducking and how much it's ducking. Then you'll also see your dry signal and the reverb signal here. So I'll show you what each
I may
is.
be down, but I'm not out. Look into my eyes, there's
So this, of course, is your unmask amount, right?
against the grain. Count every loss, it's always gain.
And I'll pull this way up here. So this green in the background, this darker green, that's the dry signal. And then the brighter green up front is your reverb signal. Okay? So you can visually see what everything is, and the difference between what's being pulled out, pulled down, and the difference between your reverb signal versus your dry signal. Okay, so next is the bypass for just the unmask, which we kind of touched on at the beginning, but here we go.
I may be down, but
So I'll really mask
I'm
it.
not out. Look into my eyes, there's no doubt.
And that just bypasses the unmask, and that's it.
I found my place against the grain.
So you can
Count
really
every
compare and see and hear exactly what the unmask is doing. And this is your delta or your listen button, so you can hear the difference or what the unmasking is doing. What is it exactly is it pulling out?
loss, it's
So this is what it's pulling out, right? This is up here. You're not going to hear anything because it's not pulling anything out. Pull it down here. That's what it is dynamically reducing. Okay, so that's pretty much all of your controls here. Now I just want to go over real quick the difference between a dry wet knob of a standard reverb versus what this is. All right, so this is Brainworks BX Rooms. It's a much older reverb, but it was very advanced, at least for its time, in a reverb that started to include EQ directly within the reverb, which wasn't something that you always had. We'll get more into that a little bit later, but here is our standard dry wet mix knob. So listen to the difference between a dry wet mix knob versus adding reverb to the dry signal, which is what Aurora does. So here we go. This is just dry, just on this vocal. Pull in the reverb. All right, so we are reducing the dry as we mix in more wet. Now, if you want a reverb where you have total control over every single thing and you want to do it all manually, then check out BrainWorks BX Rooms. But let's head back over here now to Aurora and hear that one more time with this reverb knob and see how it differs.
Infinite echoes, you're my fire. Through the night, your light will guide. In a row.
So again, this reverb knob simply adds reverb. It's not pulling down the dry signal or mixing between dry and wet. But again, what it really is the same thing that you would do, again, if you bust your reverb out, your track out to a reverb bus, right? So let me show you what we used to do here, what you still can do. All right, so let's check out this track and see how we would set up a reverb normally by creating that send, things that Aurora does for us. So let's say I want to add reverb to this. There's a tiny bit of delay in it already, but I want to add reverb to this, but I don't want it to be directly on the track because, in the past, all we really had was a wet, dry mix. So I do have Aurora on this. I want to show you what Aurora does, but this is completely bypassed for right now. So what I would do is create a send. So I could, well, it depends on how your DAW works, but I could create a send here. So I have a send, an effects send, where I'm sending this dry track out and creating an effects return, which I have way over here. So then on this track, I would put an EQ here. So before the reverb, then I'll put my reverb, and this is BX Aura, not Aurora. This is Aura. These are from the same company, BrainWorks, iZotope, Native Instruments, same company now. Also really cool reverb, but this one here has a mix knob. So because I'm doing a send, I would have my reverb on my send here, on my return, up to 100% mix. And then I also have an EQ after that. Now, to be technical, Aura does have some built-in EQ, but let's just pretend that it's a really old, reverb, and it doesn't have those features. So what you would do is you would now EQ the incoming dry signal, feed it through your reverb, and then EQ that again, right, to get the exact reverb sound that you want. Things that you don't have to do with Aurora because it's going to do it automatically for you, right? So if my reverb was masking everything, I'll just turn off my EQs and just have Aura in here. Then I would dial in that reverb with this fader.
Hearts that beat without a doubt, reverb that can scream or shout. Aurora nights, they take me high.
But there's no, there's kind of some masking going on. So then I come into my EQ here, turn this on and set it up to make sure I'm pulling out some frequencies before it hits that reverb, maybe hyping some other frequencies.
In the echoes, I'm alive.
That's a little bit better.
The sound so clear,
But then I'll turn on this post EQ
it makes me cry.
and dial out around this area that gets a little muddy.
In this reverb, I can fly.
Then dial in the amount I want.
Memories within the sound, spinning lights that wrap around every note.
But of course, like this, I'm not getting that dynamic reduction. I'm getting a static reduction. So I could use a dynamic EQ and set this up and have that do all that for me. Or what I could do is just use Aurora. Now, just to be clear, I'm not knocking BX Aura. It's actually a really great reverb. This is a really great creative reverb. So still, if you want to check this one, it has a really cool reverse built into it. You can do a lot of stuff with this reverb. But if you want your good bread and butter reverb to get that reverb sound that basically you want for 90% of stuff, I would go with Aurora first. If you want something more creative, then you might want to check out Aura. So let's just bypass Aura. Let's get rid of all of our different EQs on our sends. In fact, we don't even need the send or the return there. So let's just turn that down completely. And instead of doing all of that, let's just use Aurora. Aurora is going to create that internal structure, that send and return structure behind, in the back end for us. And all we have to do is use this to basically duck out, or EQ out, however you want to think of it, the conflicting frequencies with our dry signal. And then we can make this as wet as we want. Okay.
In the night I find the
And come up here.
I am bound. Hearts that beat without a doubt. Reverb that can scream or shout.
Again, if you want it more narrow,
Aurora nights, they take me high.
big and wide,
In the echoes I'm alive.
I can pull out some of that low end.
Sound so clear it makes me cry. In this reverb I can fly. Memories within the sound, spinning lights that wrap around. Every note a promise found. Aurora's magic knows no bounds. Infinite the space we share in the night without a care. Light
So you see how I'm able to completely saturate this and just make it float around and give you that airy reverb feeling without it being masked by the reverb itself. And again, this happened automatically. Yeah, sure, I did manually pull this out a little bit for the low end, but other than that, all I had to do was pull this down till it sounded good, and Aurora took care of all of that for me. So that's why, I think Aurora is really an awesome reverb plugin. Okay, now I'll do a few more samples, but you might be saying, okay, well, I'm pretty sure there's some smart reverbs out there already. In fact, Neoverb is one that iZotope created previously, and it's still a great reverb. But does Neoverb do the same thing as Aurora? Kind of, but not really, right? It's not the same exact thing in that we have a dry wet mix right here and not just adding reverb. Now this does have a pre-EQ and a post-EQ built in, and it has the reverb assistant, which can listen to the signal and remove conflicting frequencies for you. It does do it automatically, but you have to go through a process that takes a couple seconds. It doesn't take that long. But then of course you can adjust it however you want here. You can also see any conflicting frequencies, any masking down here. You can also use relay plugins and see if there's any conflicting frequencies and fine tune that. But let's listen to this here just so I can show you.
heart and sound entwined, they play.
All right.
A world of echoes and of dreams. In Aurora's glow it seems.
So it's totally different in the way you do it. Right, that's mixed wet.
A symphony so sweet.
We're pre-EQing and post-EQing.
Aurora, take me there.
So it's cool that all that's built into Neoverb, and Neoverb is still a fine reverb, but I'd probably reach for Aurora first, just because it's going to do a lot of this stuff much faster and automatically, and without having to go say Reverb Assistant,
Sound of
play the
heaven
audio,
everywhere.
and let this unmask for you here.
Reverb touching every soul. In your ways I feel whole.
There we go.
From the silence to the tides, Aurora's light.
So it's a different way to do it. Again, like I said, I would probably just grab Aurora, just pop it right on there, and then add in whatever amount of reverb I want.
Dreams in every tone. Reverb touching every soul. In your ways I feel whole. From the silence to the tide.
Right, you hear how much clearer and articulate it is, because again, we're adding a reverb, we're not taking down the dry.
Aurora's light never hides, giving life to every phrase. Songs are born in this haze. Oh, take me there. Sound of heaven everywhere. Reverb touching every soul. In your ways I feel whole. From the silence to the tide.
Okay. Now, also, as I have mentioned a couple times, whenever we were dealing with our sins and returns here, again, you can use Aurora that same exact way. Just click that solo reverb button when it's on your effect return, and then dial in the amount of reverb, the gain of the reverb that you want, and it's going to operate in the same way, and it will still pull out those masking frequencies for you. Okay, so now we'll check this out on a few more samples here, but that should pretty much tell you how Aurora Works, your new AI-driven reverb. So I have Plasma, which is the first plugin in the Catalyst series. Okay, Plasma is an automatic a saturating plugin. I just have it on this piano because it kind of brightens it a little bit. Make sure I turn this on. There we go. Then we have Aurora on here, so let's pop that on. Check this one out here. Getting very wide or more narrow. I really like that wide because I can just make it sound huge, you know? Maybe make it a little darker though. Put this piano in a Cathedral. Long decay on that too. Or if you don't want that much, we could just have maybe a bit of an ambience in there. Much more subtle. Bypass it. Very cool. Let's go to another sample here. So here I have a cello. Also have our smart saturator on there. And Aurora on here as well. This time I have it in a chamber. Smart reduction there. Make it really wide. Bypass it. Bring it back in. So that's a really cool thing about Aurora, again, is that you're adding reverb. You're not pulling down that dry signal. So it still sounds nice and loud. We've just added reverb to it. So it doesn't get drowned out. It doesn't start to sound washy, you know? So you can really use Aurora on anything from your vocals to your strings to guitar, drums, even bass. So here we have, I think, guitar and bass. Yes, I already have reverb on there, sort of exaggerated. Let's look at this bass. This is a cool thing about bass here with Aurora. So I can pull reverb into a bass, which you normally wouldn't do. And I also have it really wide, so I'll put it down to normal there. So I'm going to over exaggerate it here. We have the chamber selected. Now the cool thing I can do is I can widen that out and make that bass sound huge without making it any less articulate, right? Now it may not be what you want, but it's pretty cool that you can do that. Even with a long decay here, you can bypass that. That's just the bass. Then back with the reverb. Bass is still completely articulate. We just made it sound giant and huge now. Right, you use reverb, you can set things in a certain space, give it a different feel. Pretty long pre-delay on that. Bypass. Pull it down a bit. Of course, if you just want, you just want to add a little bit, just add a little bit. Bypass everything. It's off. Back on. Sounds good. Yeah, Aurora is just super. It's crazy that it does all this stuff automatically in the back end for you. creating that complex structure that you would normally have to create yourself. All right, let's check one more thing here.
In a world of sound and brass so bold, there's a reverb story told through the nights where music flows.
So I have Aurora on the vocal, but I also have it back here on the music part. And the reason is, if I just have Aurora on the vocal, it sounds like it may be in the wrong space.
Aurora turns light into day, every note in perfect place.
So by putting a little bit of reverb on the full mix, which is like, why would you put a reverb plugin directly on a full, stem of all the music? That's unheard of. Well, you can do that with Aurora because you have your unmasker to pull out any of those conflicting frequencies. You're just adding reverb to it, which is really cool. And again, you could set up a bus structure yourself and use that solo reverb and send both of those tracks to a single reverb, essentially a single space. But by having Aurora create all that structure for you, essentially, again, in the back end, you can have different spaces for your different stems or different parts of a song, right? So on the vocal, I have them in a chamber, while I may want a plate, sort of a sound, sort of a space for the music part, right? So that's pretty cool that we can do that. So just adding some reverb to just the music. I'm also making it really wide. Right? Of course, I could change this up if I wanted to, but I think we're doing good here. So that just adds another space, and it blends very well once we get the vocal in here.
Every rhyme, swinging tales of time sublime, with a single touch and twist, Aurora wraps you in a mist. Big band music, pure and sweet, magic that you can't defeat. Like the moonlight on the bay, Aurora guides the notes we play.
Bypass.
Every solo, every swing, Aurora Reverb, it's our thing.
Back on.
Aurora, oh, the way you shine, turning tracks into divine. Every beat and every rhyme,
Bypass the unmask.
swinging tales of time sublime.
Listen to that not unmasked.
The way you shine, turning tracks into divine. Every beat and every rhyme, swinging tales of time.
Right, you hear how it comes through better once we unmask it or duck down those frequencies that are conflicting with the dry.
Sublime. With a single touch and twist, Aurora wraps you in a mist. Big band music, pure and sweet, magic that you can't defeat. Like the moonlight on the bay, Aurora guides the notes we play. Every solo, every swing, Aurora Reverb, it's our thing.
Boom! There it is, folks. That is Aurora from iZotope, your new self-mixing. I don't know why I'm getting so excited. Ugh, you're not on a wrestling ring there, you dummy. All right. This is Aurora from iZotope. If you want to pick it up for yourself, it's available at all of the different retailers. It's, at the beginning of the year, or actually late last year, I told you guys about a bunch of coming plugins and things that are coming that are going to just reshape the way you mix, reshape the way you think about mixing. And we are seeing that more and more and more and more. And Aurora is one of those things, and it's really, really cool. And I would definitely suggest that you at least go check it out for yourself. All right, so once again, folks, this is Aurora from iZotope, your new self-mixing reverb plugin. Go check it out right now.
Aurora, you lift me the path I now walk. With every step there's a song as we talk. Aurora sings and the world turns bright, dancing in the echoes of your light.